I am Jeff Insko. I am one of the, sorry, beep, let's turn that off. I am one of the steering committee members of CaseOU. If you don't know us, we're the Campus Alliance for Sustainability and the Environment, a coalition of a whole bunch of faculty and students and staff and community members who kind of brought themselves together to promote sustainability practices and ideas and education across the university. We're just kind of a ragtag bunch um, of like-minded folks who have come together, and I don't know, over the past few years, we've managed to make a little noise and gain some credibility on campus, which is kind of a testament, I think, to just people who share passions coming together and talking with one another. So I'm very proud to be a part of this amazing group. And we are proud to meet monthly. Everyone is welcome, by the way, to join CaseOU. We meet monthly. We often have speakers like we are having today. Otherwise, we plot and scheme and figure out ways that we can do some good on campus and in the world. I'll just, before I turn it over to my wonderful friend and colleague, Jane, I just want to say a couple of quick words about why we wanted to host this session. Like the big picture is there's nothing I think that universities across the country love more than ed tech. Every new shiny object that comes along over the past 30 years, universities are all too eager to jump to, and maybe to the benefit of education at times, but I think mostly it's to the benefit of private equity firms and venture capitalists. Um, and it's certainly true of AI. Since ChatGPT has kind of become publicly available over the past couple of years, universities have kind of hopped to it. And it's true of Oakland as well. And I'm not suggesting that the enthusiasm or the embrace has been entirely uncritical, as Sean just mentioned. But I do think in lots of ways, the tendency is to find ways to integrate it rather than to find ways to resist it. And that could be a problem. At Oakland, for example, we quickly established a task force. The task force put together a splashy conference that we were just talking about, all of which is good. A conversation and is always good, and exploration is always good. But I also think, a lot of human energy and a lot of institutional support has been funneled in this direction when it could be devoted to other things that I would argue are far more pressing, like public funding for higher education and dwindling graduation rates and faculty demoralization and adjunctification and woeful support for humanities disciplines, for example. And we could probably extend that list endlessly. But in fact, it's not human energy that we are interested in. The most disturbing part of the kind of AI craze is, I think, it's the use of fossil energy. That's the thing that concerns me most. And I just wanted to, CASE, wanted to make sure that that was a important and central part of any conversation that happens on AI. Christy's going to talk about this, but we already know that massive corporations like Google and Microsoft are abandoning their climate pledges. Not that they were necessarily real in the first place. They're partnering with firms like ExxonMobil to increase natural gas production to power these data centers. They're trying to reopen 3 Mile Island nuclear plant. And all of this, of course, is happening at a moment when everybody knows, unless their head is in the sand, that we desperately need to find ways to reduce fossil energy production and greenhouse gas emissions. Climate change is coming for all of us. It's here for many of us already. And we know, most of all, that it's going to affect and harm the most vulnerable populations the worst. They're going to bear the real brunt of it. And so I think it raises real questions about, setting aside the question of whether AI can be successfully and usefully and generatively integrated into classroom practices. I think it raises real questions about whether or not it is ethical in the first place, simply because of its fossil energy consumption. And so we wanted to have a conversation about that. We wanted to make sure that that was always a part of every conversation of AI. It's too easy to sweep it under the rug. And so here we are. Jane very helpfully agreed to go out and find us someone who could speak on this, and our mutual friend Christy eagerly agreed to do so. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jane O'Neill, who's going to introduce Christy and moderate our event today. So thanks everybody for hearing me out.
Well, I didn't agree to go out and find someone I already knew who it was, so or who to ask, and she said she would do it. So it's my very great pleasure to introduce Christy McGillivray today. She is the political and legislative director for the Michigan chapter of the Sierra Club, and she is a powerhouse. Her expertise focuses on Great Lakes water quality issues, including PFAS and other toxics, and she has worked tirelessly to get a whole slate of bills passed last year that will protect our climate, making Michigan a leader in climate progress. She is neck deep, it seems like always, but particularly so these days, in Michigan politics, working to keep our democracy alive and to keep the progress we've made from being derailed by energy and water-hungry data centers. Christy's been an environmental advocate her entire career, except for stints as a chemistry and physics teacher and as a union organizer. She was a field canvasser for Clean Water Action. She has a master's degree in environmental education from the University of Edinburgh and has worked as an adjunct professor at Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia, and at Lawrence Tech in Southfield, Michigan. She has been working endlessly to get environmental champions elected and to keep them acting to benefit the environment once they are in office. I'm very grateful that she took time out of her extremely busy schedule to come talk to us today about what's the matter with data centers. Take it away, Christy.
Thanks, Jane. And should I share my screen in order to present? I think I should be able to, right? Let's see.
We made Sean, yep, you're a co-host, so you're able to do it.
She's so simple.
Great. So can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll go to...
And do you want to take any questions as you go, or do you want to hold them till the end?
I prefer as we go. I like the whole lecture thing is not my favorite form of communication.
Okay, so if folks want to put things in the chat, I'll try and keep an eye on it.
Yeah, and feel free to interrupt me. So I had a communications person who works in like progressive media world reach out to me the other day, literally yesterday, and he said, "Hey, does artificial intelligence have anything to do with this like data centers thing?" And it was crazy to me that he said that because the answer is yes. And I said, "Levi, have you not been reading anything that I've sent you? Artificial intelligence is data centers. That's what we're talking about." And he goes, "Oh, I've been reading the reporting and no one's saying that." So I want to make sure that I make it crystal clear when we are talking about data centers and how we regulate them and subsidize them and how they're built out, we are talking about the real world material things that are building artificial intelligence. And that's why the landscape has changed so dramatically in just the past couple of years. So to start, I would love to show a little video clip from our Virginia chapter of Sierra Club. For anyone who's not aware, Virginia is the global hub of the data center build out to support artificial intelligence. 70% of the world's internet passes through data centers located in Virginia. So it's truly ground zero. And it's the place where we're seeing some of the most worst predicted impacts from data center buildouts come to fruition. So I will start with this. It's a short video. Let me know if you can't hear it.
And now to the latest on the data center expansion in Virginia. More than 70 people rallied today calling for stricter guidelines as several more proposals are being considered statewide. 7 News reporter Rebecca Turco has the details.
We're not going anywhere.
A crowd of people united in opposition, concerned about the environment, about noise issues, as more and more data centers pop up across Northern Virginia and beyond.
The data center industry is tricky and well-funded.
For Tyler Ray, it's close to home, literally. There's a data center set to be built just outside his Bryn Mawr community, less than 250 feet, he says, from some residences in the development, with an electrical substation less than 100 feet away.
Now we really just kind of feel abandoned by the county because they failed to take action kind of when they could.
He says the project proposal is permitted by right, which means it can be built without a public hearing if the developer follows county regulations and doesn't request any special exceptions. The county is looking to update those regulations, releasing a staff report last month following weeks of resident feedback. But Tyler feels it still doesn't go far enough.
A 75-foot tall data center that's the size of a Walmart doesn't belong 200 feet from a resident or a pool or a playground, which is exactly what's happening in, say, Bryn Mawr situation and in data centers both across Fairfax County and across the Commonwealth.
According to the Virginia Sierra Club, there are more than 300 data centers in operation or proposed statewide.
I don't think Virginia has ever seen any build out like this ever.
Ann Bennett, the data center issues chair, says over time, its estimated data centers could take up 300 million square feet statewide.
When you're talking about this level of energy, every level of government has to be part of the solution. It's that big a problem.
According to the Data Center Coalition, the industry has invested more than $37 billion in Virginia over the past 2 years to meet growing demands. The coalition president sending me a statement during the state's legislative session saying they'll continue to work collaboratively to ensure positive economic, environmental, and social outcomes. Meanwhile, ralliers are keeping the pressure on ahead of the Virginia primaries and beyond.
Right now, residents, environmentalists, and voters, we don't have a voice when it comes to data centers, especially in Fairfax County, and that needs to change. No more unchecked data centers.
Reporting in Reston.
Okay. So that was a little snapshot. I think that was a press conference that they held, I want to say about 7 months ago or something like that. So relatively recent. So today, what I'm going to cover is just a quick snapshot of what actually data centers are. Talk a little bit about the claims that supporters make to justify the tax incentives that states are putting on the table to get these facilities to locate in different states. And then I'll quickly go over the current status where data centers are in Michigan. We'll talk about energy use, which is a huge deal. We're going to talk about water use, which is a huge deal. In both those scenarios, it's ratepayer protections in particular that we're also concerned about. And then I'm going to cover some of the solutions because there is a way to do this build out of artificial intelligence right. It's not a choice of either do we do it or do we not do it. It's a question of whether or not we do it with the right priorities in mind. So any questions so far? Nope. Okay.
And now to the latest on the
data. Go forward. Should go forward. There we go. Okay. So data centers, this is a photo of the Switch data center, which is located in Kent County, just outside of Grand Rapids. You got a bunch of tax breaks. We'll get into that. It's the old steel case pyramid building for anyone who knows anything about West Michigan business. They are the facilities that actually house the central processing units and servers and all of the actual equipment that the internet runs on. They are the material real world things that help us stream, videos, all the work that we do, just all of it, right? All of that has to happen in what is referred to as a data center. However, the actual work that data centers are doing changed dramatically when artificial intelligence built through large language models blew up when ChatGPT came out. And I think that was 2022, but I'm sure that someone on this call could actually say exactly what it was. And the difference is the amount of energy and water that large language models use to build artificial intelligence. So there's a fantastic two-part series in the Sierra Club magazine. I've got links to it in this presentation and I dropped that in the chat so you guys can go and read it for yourselves. And I don't often pitch Sierra magazine articles because I usually get frustrated with the things that they leave out, but these are good. So you take my word for it. The real barrier to artificial intelligence right now by the companies and entities that are developing it, their perception of it is that they are running up against the actual physical constraints of what they want to do when it comes to procuring energy and the amount of water that they need. I think Jeff mentioned that 3 Mile Island is their talks about restarting it. They're going to restart 3 Mile Island to power data centers. Microsoft is signing a deal to make that happen. It is all being underwritten with taxpayer dollars. So I think we need to be really clear that when we're talking about Microsoft signing a deal, they're signing a deal to buy the power. It is going to be taxpayer dollars that actually pay for reopening that facility. And for anyone who's not aware, 3 Mile Island is the location of the worst nuclear incident in American history. So all of that is on the table. And the reason that this is on the table right now is because of the sheer amount of electricity that artificial intelligence needs. And this is coming at the same time that we are electrifying transportation and we are electrifying the home electricity sector. So there's going to be, the goal is to move away from fossil gas and towards electricity that is generated with renewable energy. So after decades of a relatively flat demand for electricity in the United States, we are now seeing a massive spike in electricity demand right at the time that we have to cut emissions and stop burning fossil fuels. So it's a perfect storm that is truly going to, how we deal with this is going to be a question of whether or not we meet our stated emissions goals. That's the scale of the problem. And I'm belaboring it just a little bit because the perception of legislators in Lansing is that this is a last minute, inconsequential, pesky little question that is frustrating to deal with. And why are environmentalists complaining about it right now? Why weren't they complaining about it 2 years ago? Well, 2 years ago, we weren't restarting nuclear power plants to power artificial intelligence. It has literally changed that much in just 2 years. So Switch case study, I mentioned Switch is the co-located, that's the term that they use. So it's not owned by just one tech company. It's a data center that rents out its various, I don't know, CPUs or whatever's in there to different entities that want to use them. That's different than hyperscale and enterprise data centers, which are the ones that are solely dedicated to building out the large language model AIs. So everyone knows. But the justification for giving tax breaks to tech companies that want to come and build data centers in Michigan is that they are going to pay a bunch of money in local taxes. They're going to be great tech jobs, and they are going to be one of the really important players in restarting our manufacturing economy. And it's the fancy tech stuff. So I think the sales and use tax exemptions that Switch fought for in 2015 when they set up in Kent County, along with that, they promised they were going to supply 1,000 jobs that paid way over the median wage. And they were going to pay a bunch of money in taxes to Kent County. And it was going to be great for everyone in Kent County because they were going to pay some money in taxes. So it was okay that they're getting the sales and use tax exemption. Well, that's not what happened. They went back to local government and claimed further tax exemptions through declaring their facility part of a Renaissance zone. And there was actually a lawsuit that was finally settled between the Kent County ISD and a local school district because Switch was doing its best to pay absolutely no taxes to local government to fund any of the things that actually, make society function. And in 2021, when we finally got some information from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which is the entity that's supposed to check on whether or not all these corporate subsidies are actually worth it, turns out there are only 43 workers working there for $729 a week, which is not what Switch promised when they got massive tax breaks. And as of now, operating in 2023, they are receiving, between all the different combinations of tax breaks that they went after getting their sales and use tax break, is about a 70% tax break. So the number one roadblock that we hit when talking with legislators is the argument that these entities are drivers of economic development. So interrogating what happened with Switch is important, although most of this presentation is going to be about the environmental side of things and how those costs are also being passed along to taxpayers. I think it's important for people to know this, especially because the bills in Michigan include further ways that companies can come for more local tax exemptions and tax capture. Any questions about that? Okay. So we currently have 52 data centers in Michigan. I think when the environmental community first started talking about this, I think there was a perception that we were debating about whether or not to incentivize them coming here now under the assumption that we don't have, no, there's 52 of them. They're the internet, right? So like in any part of the world where you have access to the internet, there's probably a data center somewhere close by. Again, the difference now is like the kind that we're building. And the big fight that we had last spring and just this September about how to incentivize them was an extension of those sales and use tax bills that I mentioned with the Switch data center. So it's extending those that are already on the books, and it's adding some more language to them to account for the new creation of these. They're calling them enterprise data centers in the bills, but it's what the industry calls like hyperscale data centers, the ones building out large language models. So those bills have not passed because people like Jane fielded tons of panicked calls from me and got lots of other people to weigh in and pressure state legislators to not do bad things. So those have not passed. And what's interesting about that is that even though the extension of the sales and use tax credits specifically for these massive facilities have not passed, Switch has already begun construction on a second campus out in Kent County. Microsoft has purchased over 300 acres of property to build a hyperscale data center in Kent County. And Switch is about to go public for $40 billion. So you might hear, if you join in the fight and start putting pressure on your legislators to not sign off on these, you might hear that, oh, these poor companies, they're never going to come to Michigan and they're never going to do anything if we don't, give them these tax exemptions. And they already are. So they're going to come here and they're going to set up shop and they're going to operate with or without the sales and use tax exemption. And our goal is to make sure that we're regulating them both through the carrots of tax incentives and outside of that too. So any questions on that?
Hey, Christy, do we,
Oh, Charlie.
is
Hi,
there a
Charlie.
way to, hi, is there a way to figure out if there are any data centers in my legislative district?
Oh, yeah. So I got this from Data Center Map. You see that link? I'm actually
Okay.
not I didn't vet this source. I'm assuming it is accurate, but always good to check. If you click on that, it'll tell you exactly where they are. I think it's supposed to be like a resource for people in industry that are trying to figure out where they can rent CPU space or something.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay. And Charlie and Jane were really involved in our legislative fight this past session. But if anyone has questions about the actual tax policy that we were working to get our fixes attached to, feel free to pipe up or write it down later and we can talk about it. Okay. So why we're making such a big fuss about this, Sierra Club and our partners in the advocacy space in Lansing literally ground the legislature to a halt at the end of June. We were all up until 5:30 a.m. trying to get our fixes to the build out of AI attached to sales and use tax incentives. And the bills wound up not passing because we never saw bill drafts that actually included our solutions to energy, water, and ratepayer protections. And on September 25th, the state legislature called another session day and tried to run the bills again without our protections, and we stopped them again. And the question that I get most from legislators is, oh my God, I can't believe you guys are doing this. This is just a sales and use tax exemption. Why are you grinding everything to a halt over what we thought was obscure tax policy that no one was paying attention to? Well, this is why. Right now, again, this has all happened over the past couple of years. The public is paying for new fossil fuel plants, new gas plants. Coal plants are staying online. The first report of a coal plant that was slated to be shut down but was staying online hit in early 2022, late 2021. So there's water scarcity in places where they're pumping massive amounts of groundwater at a rate that is not sustainable. The cost for both the transmission of electricity and the actual new electrical generating units that have to be built are almost uniformly being footed. The bills being footed by regular ratepayers and not the actual entities that are buying all the electricity. There are a few exceptions to that. And the tech companies love to trot out the headlines about the few exceptions to that rule. But the rule that we're seeing in Public Service Commission hearings across the country is that regular people are having their bills go up so that Microsoft can build new gas plants for its artificial intelligence. And then, of course, we're dealing with grid instability because we do not have an electrical grid and transmission system that is capable of handling the amount of electricity that we need to send through it. So this is a huge deal And we are just now starting to wrap our heads around it. And that is in part due to the fact that tech is a black box. It is not transparent. And it took the actual build out of new gas plants, fossil coal plants staying online, transmission costs being passed along to ratepayers at PSC here. It took all of that stuff actually starting to really happen to even realize that that was what was happening, because that public paper trail is all we have to actually try and get a handle on the needs of tech to build out artificial intelligence. They didn't give everyone a heads up and say, oh, by the way, we're going to need 5 gigawatts of electricity. Nope. It was in Public Service Commission hearings where we started getting a handle on what was happening. So that's why. So there are a lot more examples than this. And anytime you see a hyperlink in here, I encourage you to check it out. So these are some of the examples, though, that I think illustrate why we are fighting so hard here in Michigan, and why, frankly, I am spending any time talking to you today instead of just talking to voters. If this was not the environmental issue of, possibly the rest of my lifetime, I would not be talking to you about this today. I would be talking to voters, but that's how big a deal this is. So in Wisconsin, Microsoft is building what they're calling, I think they're calling it Stargate. It is their hyperscale data center that is going to be entirely devoted to whatever large language model Microsoft is building out that, of course, we don't know anything about. And that was sited in Wisconsin, right at the location where the Great Lakes Compact broke. So for anyone who doesn't know about the Great Lakes Compact, it's the 8-state, 2 federal government, provinces in Canada, massive international treaty that has federal and state implementing legislation that is supposed to govern how we use Great Lakes water. It is supposed to be a backstop against any water diversions. And the place where the biggest water diversion was approved under the Great Lakes Compact was Waukesha, Wisconsin, where this facility is being built. And it is the former site of the Foxconn facility that Trump never got actually off the ground and kind of backed out. If you guys remember that from, I don't know, 7 years ago. So that's the location. So it's really concerning that it's going to be drawing water at the spot where the Great Lakes Compact failed. And since it was announced about 6 months ago in Public Utility Commission hearings in Wisconsin, it has become crystal clear that in Wisconsin, the plan for powering this facility is to build massive new gas plants that ratepayers are going to pay for. So everyone's bill is going to go up to provide electricity specifically for Microsoft. And also, this is in the midst of us under the extreme pressure to cut emissions. So we are not cutting emissions. We are building new gas plants, and that is unacceptable. In Georgia, Georgia's a little bit, it's similar to Virginia in that they have been using tax policies and tax breaks to incentivize the location of data centers in Georgia. So they've had a massive build out, kind of similar to Virginia. And it's not quite as much as Virginia, but it's one of the most intense spots of development around the country. In Georgia, they are definitely expanding gas plants. Folks' utility bills are going through the roof. They are purchasing fossil fuel through the interstate transmission grid, which is a very complex regulatory structure. But they are keeping other fossil fuel plants online in other parts of that regional transmission system in order to provide the power that Georgia's data center needs, if that makes sense. That's also happening in Virginia. The poor return on investment for the tax incentives that the state of Georgia has been providing to tech companies is the justification that Republicans gave in Georgia for pausing all their tax incentives. So there are floor speeches happening in Georgia in their state legislature where Republicans are saying that the cost that is being passed along to the public far outweighs any promises that tech companies made about the investments they were going to bring to Georgia. And strictly on a cost benefit analysis that doesn't take into account any of the externalities that it should, Republicans in Georgia are saying this is a really bad idea. The city of Atlanta has put an official moratorium on any more data centers locating there. The governor of Georgia vetoed the bipartisan bills that would have paused their data centers. So Georgia is still reeling from the fallout from that. Ohio is obviously close to home. They are also experiencing a massive build out of large language models. In the region of Ohio where that development is exploding, there was a projection given in one of their Public Utility Commission hearings that portion of Ohio was going to quickly match the electricity needs of Manhattan because of the amount of energy drawn from data centers. And the really mind-blowing thing that's happening in Ohio is that the power company, AEP, don't ask me what it stands for, but AEP is like the DTE equivalent, right? It's their big utility. The utility in Ohio is intervening in the Public Service Commission hearings there, saying that they want to make sure that tech companies are on the hook for actually purchasing the amount of power that they say they're going to need, because the utility itself is saying that they doubt the actual claims from tech companies about the amount of energy that they need to build, because they think that they're shopping around to lots of different places to see where they can get the cheapest power. So they might say that they're going to use this much electricity, so therefore everyone in Ohio needs to build a lot more gas plants that ratepayers have to pay for, and then go move to North Carolina. That's what they're worried about in Ohio. So what happened from the tech industry is that they intervened in the Public Service Commission hearings with a proposal that they are referring to as a settlement. And for folks that are not familiar with how utility commission governance works, it is an actual legal body. It is overseen by public service commissioners that are usually appointed, and they actually produce binding legal judgments. So you're functionally sitting in front of some version of a court of law for utilities. So what tech companies are doing is they are telling the equivalent of a utility judge what their actual judgment is going to be. They aren't referring to it as a submission to the docket. They are saying this is the settlement. And the public service commissioners in Ohio are saying it is not a settlement. We are the ones who decide on the settlement. You have provided your submission. That is not a settlement. And they are truly insisting that it is just a settlement. It is like, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing that they're doing that. So we'll see how the public service commissioners in Ohio actually respond to that. I think it demonstrates the amount of power and hubris that tech companies have right now, because they have been able to get away with so much, in my opinion. Nebraska and Omaha, massive gas plants being built there. I believe the cost is over $2 billion now for the gas plants that they're building in Omaha to actually fuel their data center build out there. Ratepayers completely on the hook. And they are keeping 2 massive coal plants online that were slated to be closed down, and they are going to be belching their toxic air pollution into the majority Black portions of the city that they have been for decades. And there's amazing coverage from reports coming out of Nebraska and in the Washington Post about regular folks with serious breathing problems, all sorts of respiratory problems because they live next to this coal plant, fully placing the blame of these coal plants staying open on tech companies. And they're right. When you look at the Public Service Commission proceedings, that is exactly what's happening. So it's really important for everyone to know that, because we are hearing things, for example, from State Senator Jeff Irwin, who represents a big portion of Ann Arbor, that data centers don't pollute, right? People don't think of the internet as dirty. So it's not that the data center itself is belching toxic air pollution, but the data center is using so much electricity that facilities that do belch toxic air pollution are going to continue to do so, even though they were slated to be closed down. So I really want to make sure that we drive that point home, because for any decision makers that you're talking to, they are going to possibly claim that these facilities don't pollute. Any questions about any of that? Okay. Okay, so Virginia, again, lots of hyperlinks here. I encourage you to check it out, read everything that's going on. So as I mentioned, Virginia, home to the largest concentration of data centers in the world. It's not slowing. And there are coal plants as far away as West Virginia in the same transmission network that feeds electricity to Virginia that, again, were slated to be closed down. They're staying online. And ratepayers in Virginia are footing the bill for new gas plants. And I want to point to this, the air quality variance link down there. So one of the key features of these hyperscale data centers is that they absolutely can never, ever be shut off. And the argument for that tech companies give is if we shut them down or shut them off, then people can't stream Netflix and there'll be like a public uprising, right? Or like the internet won't work. And at this point, it's basically like a utility and we can't ever pause the internet ever. However, there's no transparency in tech, so we just have to take their word for it. And because their power can never, ever go off, They, in most places, seek to set up thousands of industrial diesel generators that they want to be able to run immediately in case there's ever an interruption in power, regardless of current air quality conditions, regardless of any natural, like regardless of anything, right? So there are these air quality variances that they want to put in place. And what that would mean is if it's a poor air quality day in a community and you add the emissions associated with running thousands of diesel generators, it will very likely trigger lethal asthma attacks and other pulmonary cardiac issues. The public health data on the impacts of poor air quality is crystal clear. At a population level, it is like one of the most toxic and lethal things that we are exposed to. And tech companies were pushing hard to be able to run thousands of these things around the clock with absolutely no check. So I do want to point out that Elon Musk's artificial intelligence, which he has named Grok, is running in Memphis, Tennessee right now. And Elon Musk has completely ignored any state oversight and is legally running thousands of diesel generators right next to an environmental justice community that has serious respiratory issues. There's great reporting from Time Magazine uncovering what's actually happening down there, because again, there's very little transparency and we don't get good reporting from tech on what's happening. So water use too, back to the transparency issue. It took a FOIA to figure out that in Loudoun County, which is Loudoun County and Fairfax County, where most of the data center concentration is in Virginia, they've seen a 250% increase in their water usage from a local water utility. And that coincides directly with the boom and build out for artificial intelligence. So it's a problem. Speaking of water, a lot of data center campuses have been built in the American Southwest because of the access to solar energy, which is good, especially if tech companies are paying for it. If they're building massive solar farms, utility scale solar farms to power their artificial intelligence, we're not mad about that. But again, there has to be some transparency around it. However, there is no water there, and water is the most efficient way to cool these server farms. I think everyone knows you can even feel it. Your computer gets hot when it's running. If they get too hot, they will, actually it'll damage the equipment. That's bad. So the massive amount of water that has to be consumed by these facilities, especially in any drought stressed places, raises really serious concerns about what we're prioritizing. Right now, for example, like in Phoenix, we are prioritizing water for tech companies building artificial intelligence, I guess, entities, and we don't know what they're using them for. We don't know how they're doing it. There's no transparency, and it is putting at risk the drinking water for people. And it is putting at risk the water that Arizona desperately needs for everything other than artificial intelligence. So that raises really serious questions about what we're prioritizing and why. A data center can use up to 5 million gallons of water per day, just one of them. And some states there are hundreds of them. And for some comparison, the state of Michigan collectively lost it over the Nestle bottled water withdrawal. And that was, 600,000 or something, like 600, 800,000 gallons of water per day. So we're talking about a draw of water that's like orders of magnitude more. It is online with about the amount of water that very heavy industry has to use, or for example, the amount of water that a nuclear plant draws to cool its facilities. So it is at the very high end of water users for any sort of like industrial category. And obviously that really matters, right? The transparency issue, it took a very aggressive FOIA and lawsuit from a local newspaper in Oregon to actually figure out how much water was being drawn from a local stress system. And there's, self-reporting showing that it is increasing dramatically. So we don't talk a lot right now in Lansing about the transparency issues with tech, but I think it is like perhaps just as big an issue as everything else, because if we don't know exactly what they're doing, then we're not responding properly with policy, right? Any questions about that? Everyone's going twice? Okay. So in Michigan, I mentioned that there were an extension of existing sales and use tax bills on the table, along with reopening 3 Mile Island, the shuttered Palisades nuclear power plant, which is operating over in Berrien County. Well, it's not, it's shuttered, but it was operating in Berrien County in far southwest Michigan. Now I believe it has gotten over $4 billion in taxpayer subsidies. By the way, just to put some clarity on those numbers, we are begging for like a couple million for public transit, right? So we can't have public transit because that's too expensive, but we can give a shuttered nuclear plant $4 billion so it can provide electricity to build an artificial intelligence that we're not being informed of at all. We don't know what it's doing. Anyway, so priorities. So there are massive taxpayer subsidies already going into the infrastructure that data centers will need in Michigan. The reason why we have prioritized this so much is because of the massive win that we had when we passed our clean energy package. And a lot of people on this call were in the trenches with us on that and fighting up until it was November, what was it? November 2023 when it finally passed, I believe, right? So in November of 2023, we got our clean energy standard for the state of Michigan, which says we have to get to 100% clean energy by 2040. We have to. And then there are benchmarks along the way to do that. And then there's the definition of clean energy, and then it's like how the Public Services Commission is going to do it, and then we're mandating energy efficiency and all of that. It is one of the best clean energy standards at the state level in the country, if not the best, because we got labor standards secured in there too. Don't get me wrong, there's some flaws, but when you compare it to other states, it's really good. And in that bill, there are off-ramps if utilities cannot actually keep the electricity on, because the mandate is that electricity service must be provided. That is the top mandate. If meeting our renewable energy goals gets in the way of meeting that mandate, companies can do whatever they want to provide the electricity, which we call those the off-ramps. It makes sense that they're in there because of the threats associated with not providing consistent electricity to the infrastructure that we now currently rely on. However, when we are talking about incentivizing and giving taxpayer dollars to tech companies to come here to Michigan, we have to make sure that they are also required to pay for the amount of electricity that they need to generate, especially in the form of actually building new additional renewable energy generation. And then there's some different ways that they can do that, right? It is not enough just to pay for the electricity. It is not enough just to pay for renewable energy, because we all need renewable energy. They have to pay for new renewable energy projects being brought onto the grid. And that's what we are fighting so hard for. They also cannot pass any big picture infrastructure costs along to ratepayers. Right now, the way it works is that almost all of the big infrastructure costs that are required to deliver electricity around the state, the default is that regular ratepayers foot the bill for those. And the industrial rate customers that are using those massive amounts of electricity are functionally getting a huge subsidy. We're saying that any tech companies can't do that. We're saying that's the status quo. We know that's the status quo. We know how that works. We are closing those loopholes. If you are getting a tax break, you have to pay for the infrastructure that is required to run your facility. So that's why that is so important. And I really want to highlight this point because there's, tech companies have a pretty good public image, right? They've spent a lot of time talking about their climate goals, which by the way, they're walking back. Their self-reported data shows that they were not meeting their previous climate goals and they're starting to revise them. So that's alarming. So they've had a lot of time to create a public image as good environmental stewards. And I want to be clear, there are differences between the tech companies and there are good people in tech companies that are interested in doing this the right way. That's something that's become really clear in our conversations with them. However, they are in bed with the utilities and oil and gas. And that is the real problem. DTE told shareholders on their most recent shareholder call that they are excited about giving as many tax breaks as possible to tech companies because they see this as a great new customer base to bring into the state. What that means is that they are going to be able to completely ignore adhering to our climate law, and they are going to be able to build new gas plants that we all pay for. DTE can't wait for that to happen. The CEO of DTE Energy, his name's Jerry Norcia, he has very recently become the president of the American Gas Association, and DTE's entire business model right now is premised on building out massive gas infrastructure across the entire country, subsidized by both ratepayers and federal dollars for renewable natural gas, which is a misnomer and not accurate. So DTE can't wait to completely ignore our climate law, which is why they're so excited about data centers coming to Michigan. And they are the ones really putting their finger on the scale with legislators. And that becomes tricky. We have to say that and we have to highlight it because legislators think they're dealing with their shiny, cool friends from the Pacific Northwest, when in reality, it is DTE that has a terrible track record on both service and delivery and everything else in political spending in Michigan. It's DTE that's really pushing this hard. The other big nasty in Michigan that I think most people on this call are familiar with is Enbridge. Enbridge on their most recent shareholder call also referred to the electricity demand from data centers as one of the ways that it will be able to justify a build out of more gas infrastructure. And any gas infrastructure will have greenhouse gas emissions associated with it at levels that will keep us from meeting our climate goals. There's no such thing as renewable natural gas. There is no such thing as clean gas. If you're burning methane, you're burning methane. There are leaks and there's emissions associated with it. So that's the scale of that problem. Is there anything else I needed to cover? So we do have to regulate these facilities outside of the sales and use tax exemptions. However, that's the carrot that everyone's running for right now, and that is a really important place to start. I think it's important to note the state Senate voted the sales and use tax exemptions, both of them, through in the spring. We stopped it in the House. They couldn't get to 56. That's when we were up to 5 in the morning. So they didn't get the bills in the spring. Folks are very mad about that. It's okay. I'm pretty mad about climate change. So it's okay if a couple of state senators are mad at me. They tried to have another go on it with it and on September 25th. It took 34 Republicans to override the block of Democrats that would not support the expansion of these sales and use tax exemptions without protections, which says a lot about leadership's choice to actually run that bill at that time. And they could not get to 56 on the second one. So that didn't even pass. So right now you have an amended Senate bill that has been sent back over to the Senate that's going to have to get another floor vote because they changed it a little bit, not enough, but a little bit. And then the other bill, they couldn't get to 56. So it's still sitting over there. We have pretty good reason to believe that the second the election is over, they're going to try and run these again and just assume that everyone is too exhausted to fight back. So that's part of the reason why I'm taking a second to talk to all of you today, because it is going to take folks springing into action pretty quickly to make it clear that we have to meet our emissions goals. Tech companies have to be forced to build out additive renewable energy and pay for it. And we have to be responsible about water use. So that's the status of that. So there are a whole bunch of solutions. There are a whole bunch of other places to intervene. For anyone in an academic setting that feels like getting very in the weeds on obscure governance structures and how we can participate in them, you can read our Demanding Better report, which is a list of 12 recommendations on ways that large energy users can intervene in Public Service Commission proceedings in order to get a better outcome. So it is like deeply wonky and complicated. I actually am not going to pretend that I'm going to be able to summarize it accurately, so I'm not going to bother. But long story short, we can and should intervene in any administrative proceedings related to Public Service Commission planning and rate setting to make sure that large users like tech companies are paying their fair share. We can work at the legislative level and actually regulate through statute, which I think we're probably going to have to do. And we can also demand transparency in a legislative setting as well. So there's a State Representative Penelope Cerniglu. She's chair of the Elections Committee in the House, and she's actually gotten to the governor's desk a couple bills demanding transparency about artificial intelligence in elections and election ads. So there's the good news is that because of her work and her lead on transparency about artificial intelligence in elections, there's already a little bit of awareness amongst state legislators that we have a transparency issue with tech companies. So hopefully we're going to be able to build on that and get a better picture of what we actually need to prepare for on the infrastructure side when it comes to artificial intelligence. So again, there's links here. Your voice truly matters. I know this is always like very big and overwhelming, but both this spring and this fall, we were, and by we, I mean the entire environmental community, we were actually all aligned, which like honestly very rarely happens. So that gives you an idea of the scale of the problem. But the entire environmental community was in full alignment and pushing hard. And we picked a fight with DTE, Enbridge, the tech companies, and a couple branches of the trade unions that were really leaning on this, and legislative leadership that have D's next to their name. We were literally fighting with that entire wall of money and power, and we won. They didn't get what they wanted. That is the power of grassroots action. And it took actually not quite as much as I thought it would. Some communications, right? We did a press release. There were a couple of radio interviews. A couple of people talked about it. It was good timing there. But, 10 phone calls into a legislative office creates the impression that this is like an issue that's absolutely on fire in the district. And it really changes things. One of the things I was really excited to see is, for example, State Representative Sam Steckloff voting with us and doing the right thing. And I 100% give credit to Jane and Charlie for that happening, because they hound her incessantly and get other people to do so too. There's not an elected official out there that does the right thing because, me, Christy McGillivray, politely asked them to. They do the right thing when constituents make them nervous. And what I do is I say, look, we're going to talk to everyone about how you voted, and this is why we have concerns. That's the role that I play. And when we can actually demonstrate that us telling people about what legislators are doing results in constituents contacting them, the conversation really changes. So on that note, I will stop sharing, and I'll happily take any questions if there are any. I talked a lot. Sorry.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is overwhelming. It's like my friend calls it drinking from the fire hose. I'm going to have to go back and listen to the recording 2 or 3 times. So the guardrails are making them pay for their own electricity generation and making them use renewable sources to get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then we can, we're working on very specific legislative language that is attached to those sales and use tax exemptions. But again, we should do it outside of that too, because all they would have to do to not comply is to not take the sales and use tax exemption. So we're going to have to come back at it and do both. And then there's the water stuff, which is an issue too.
Charlie has a question.
So you talked about lack of transparency. One place where there's lack of transparency is campaign finance. Can we get Craig Mager or the Michigan Campaign Finance Network or somebody to try and find out if the tech companies have been throwing money at the governor or any of the leadership in the state legislature?
It's such a good question. I think you should pitch it to Craig Mager. Email him.
Okay.
Orders like tips. So
Well, Ron Carlos has his hand up, but I see Doug waving his hand too.
I'll visit the State Department website later, but I haven't gotten any updates, and I usually get those, so I think we'll be okay. We most of that stuff, like the narco violence and stuff, was on the West Coast, and we're not going anywhere near there. I've intentionally chosen spots that are violence.
That was Scott talking, right? I just muted him, right? Okay.
Yes.
Should I answer Ron's question in the chat?
Charlie, did you cover it? Okay. Let's take Ron next because his hand was up.
So Ron asked if there are existing data centers in Michigan that will have to follow the rules that are being proposed. Great question. So the sales and use tax bills, it's 237 and 4906. They extend the existing tax breaks, but they also set up a tax break structure for what they define as enterprise data centers. And at the very end of the bill, the language that we've proposed, in order to get the language that we've proposed to apply to all data centers operating in Michigan, you would have to explicitly say that this language applies to the co-located, I think that's the other term for it, the co-located existing data centers and the enterprise data centers. Like, it's a pretty easy fix. That is one of the things that we got the most pushback on. We got an immediate and very negative reaction to saying that we need to apply this to all of the data centers getting tax breaks in Michigan, which is interesting. So the answer to that is currently no. And that is one of the biggest things that we got pushback in during negotiations.
Thank you, Christy.
Go ahead, Marty.
So let me ask a question that I put in chat. That's what can be done at the local level, and by that I really mean the county commissions, to stop the proliferation of fossil fuel energy plants. It seems like to me like companies like DTE Energy are convincing Republican-controlled local governmental bodies to just roll over and let them do whatever DTE Energy wants.
Well, DTE
Is there?
a bipartisan reach. So at least here in Michigan, I wouldn't count on, they have a lot of money and power. So I think it is a bipartisan issue to deal with them. So that aside, I will say that at the county level, what I would watch for are any weird zoning things that are popping up, right? So how we actually zone these facilities really matters. Keep an eye out for any attempts at local air quality permits that might look like they're tied to running hundreds, if not thousands of diesel generators. That'll probably go through Eagle, but the request might come from like a county economic development body. And the other thing that I would keep an eye on at the county level is the tax break structure. So the sales and use tax exemptions, those are pretty cut and dry and actually not that sneaky and complicated, although it does directly impact the school aid budget. I think everyone needs to know that if you're taking a sales and use tax exemption, that money is not going into the school aid budget, and that's where it should go. So you're literally directly taking money away from schools when you do that. But at the local level, they are going to come for both more tax exemptions and they're going to come for tax capture. And I didn't know what that was until I sat down with my local state representative and I was walking through the bills with her. And I was like, she used to work in municipal government, and we were working on just like trying to figure out what they actually do. And she goes, "Oh, tax capture. I don't like that." And I was like, "What is that?" And she said, tax capture is when a business comes into a local community and the local community agrees to let the business have money that would otherwise, for example, be like for the library, right? You capture that local millage money that was supposed to go towards the public service that everyone decided they wanted, and you just give it to the business that is supposedly going to do all this good stuff. So the bills do not prohibit any of that. They just spell out how it's going to happen. So what they say is that in order to get both more tax breaks and allow for tax capture, local units of government have to agree. So local cities and counties have to agree with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which is totally possible because everyone's tired and none of those people are paid anything. I mean, if they're paid anything, it's not enough and they don't even know what they're looking at. So local entities in government have to agree, or they can negotiate it through a brownfield agreement if there's a brownfield agreement associated with the property that they're on, or it can be through a Renaissance zone like the Switch Center. So it just spells out how they're going to come for more taxpayer money. I would keep a really close eye on that because I think that especially if you're dealing with more conservative Republicans in your local government, they actually might be pretty pissed off about the idea of some of the wealthiest corporations in the world getting money that was, for example, supposed to go for local police and fire.
Yeah.
Remember, there's Republicans in other states saying these are a bad return on investment. So you can poke around and find those forced bleaches and play them for folks.
So I have a little, maybe I don't know how related this is. I was at a meeting last week with Natalie Price, and she was talking about a bill that's supposed to keep dark money out of politics. Sounds like a pretty tall order. Is that?
Yeah, that's there's a package of bills. I think it's 5 total. They're being pushed by the Taking Back Our Power coalition. Jane, I could use your help getting over some Sierra Club hurdles to like actually formally join that coalition. So let's talk about that offline. We've looked at bureaucratic processes. Those are actually very viable. Those have stood up to Citizens United lawsuits in other states, and they are definitely related. So yes, Natalie Price is totally right to bring those up. Natalie Price also voted with us, and she should be thanked for that.
Fantastic. Let's Doug. Marty, do you have more to say?
I have one more question, yes, but Doug should go first, yeah.
Okay, Doug, go ahead.
Okay, I've got a quick, I guess, comment on the water usage. The most efficient and least expensive is once through water cooling from the groundwater or wherever they get it. But there's and maybe I missed it with, like you said, all the fire hose of information, but it doesn't look like we are doing a lot as far as forcing these companies to do other ways to cool, such as doing a really good job of insulating. Maybe
So-
put in.
Have a bit of a government problem with that. Electric
Well,
utilities.
could I
Oh, sorry.
finish?
Yep.
Yep, and the the other part of it is to put in heat pumps and that kind of thing. But I know you said it's a lot of water, and it is. But there's are better ways if we can force them to spend the money. So
Yeah.
anyway.
So the biggest hurdle there is that we don't actually have any public oversight of water utilities in Michigan. Fun fact. So the Public Service Commission, which oversees electrical generation, both of municipally owned and rural co-ops, as well as like the big investor-owned utilities, there's no analogous body for water utilities. And what that means is that the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which is going to be the entity that is actually overseeing whether or not these facilities are adhering with our requirements in order to get the tax breaks, they don't have an actual governance structure to engage with to force companies to do mandated specific things when it comes to water conservation. So that is like a bigger picture problem that we can't solve in sales and use tax exemptions. However, our workaround for these bills was to mandate a hookup to a municipal water utility that has existing and excess capacity. And what that will do is ensure that any of these massive draws of water it is like almost guaranteed that they're going to come from a large body of surface water and not pump groundwater if they are required to adhere to that kind of hookup. The ratepayer protection on the water side to make sure that any infrastructure associated with providing the amount of water that these facilities need is to pass the water affordability package that we've been working on for a really long time. But again, that's outside of these sales and use tax exemptions. And when it comes to actually how they are cooling these facilities, we have to regulate that outside of the sales and use tax exemptions. It is actually against current law to mandate specific business practices. And there are just some like actual hurdles that we have to get through over there. Senator Rosemary Bayer has been the real champion on the water side of things, and she's convened a separate work group to deal with large water withdrawals, even outside of the data center sector as a result of the massive fight that we had about all of this over the spring. So the short answer is yes, water is a problem. The longer answer is that we don't even have the proper governance structures in place to do it this way, but lots of people are watching it closely and working on it. Does that help?
Yes, that makes sense. The one thing I will mention is people like me. I'm a retired engineer, but there are a lot of people that are involved that have the same type of qualifications that maybe instead of trying to get the government to do it, we get some technical people to do some studies and say, hey, this is how you really need to do it. Because there is going to be, like you said, electricity costs in that as well. So I appreciate your answer.
And there are alternatives. I actually asked an engineering acquaintance about like why they were fighting this so hard, especially on the water side. I'm like, why are they fighting this so hard? There's closed loop cooling systems, there's other options, like what's the deal? And he oversees manufacturing, like the actual construction and manufacturing facilities in like lots of different places. And his answer was that it's insurance. So they have the model that they're building all over the country and they're building it really fast and they want to build it as fast as possible. And it is going to mess with their insurance if you try and force them to do something different, which I was like, oh, that makes more sense than they're just crazy assholes who just want to suck up all of our water. I mean, I still maybe kind of think that, but at least there's like some logic behind it.
Alan has a question, but let's let Marty finish first, and then I'll read Alan's question from the chat.
So I've been following for a short time a tech company's plans to open a new manufacturing plant in Genesee County, which is a little bit west of me. This is a company called Western Digital. Does anybody know them? They're a huge manufacturer of hard drives, especially external hard drives and other storage kinds of things. So this is not a data center per se, but it's another kind of a controversial tech thing. And I'm just wondering if they have the same kind of water and electricity needs. Are they in this? Would we be putting them in the same category? Is this the same kind of a big business versus the people issue?
I don't know off the top of my head. So I don't want to speak to the specifics of it because I'll give you a wrong answer. What I can say is that the strain of bringing more offshore manufacturing onshore, along with electrifying, along with the data center build out, is cumulatively putting a massive amount of strain on our electrical grid and creating this massive problem. So the big picture trend is that industry growing and manufacturing growing here in Michigan is a big factor in all of this. But I don't know about the specifics of this facility.
Thanks, Christy. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to read Alan's question unless you want to jump in, Alan, and ask it. He says, thank you for the presentation, Christy. Regarding nuclear power, is the recent buzz about modular nuclear reactors to power centers akin to clean coal, or is this an additional material impetus to the revival of nuclear energy?
I think it is an additional material impetus to the revival of nuclear energy. So whether or not it's quite as nefarious as clean coal, well, Sierra Club's position is that the negative environmental impacts associated with mining uranium and the other stuff that you need as nuclear fuel, combined with the massive taxpayer subsidies required to actually get these facilities off the ground. I mean, they're not financially viable, and in any sort of open market, they require billions of taxpayer dollars in order to run, along with the threat of what could happen if a facility obviously experiences any issues. And I mean, just like to put a finer point on it, I don't know if anyone here is from Van Buren Township, but one of the nasty little Snyder legacies is that he made it super easy to store radioactive waste and toxic waste in Michigan. And we have a lot of landfill space. So there's a bunch of news about Manhattan Project waste being trucked in to be stored in Van Buren Township. And I mean, it's like almost 400 people are packing town halls because they're absolutely outraged about it. So the question of what we do with nuclear waste remains one that no one can really satisfactorily answer. I mean, the answer is screw a community. That's the answer, right? And obviously the community that is dealing with that is not particularly happy with that answer. So Sierra Club's position on nuclear power is like not supportive. I will say just the facts of the situation sans Sierra Club's formal position. There are not any small modular reactors currently operating in the United States at scale that are online providing electricity to a transmission hub. They don't exist right now in the United States. The amount of energy and research and time that it is going to take to potentially get small modular nuclear reactors online is not fast. It is not fast to build nuclear power, and it requires it's going to be a hurdle, right? It's going to be a technological hurdle. It's going to be a permitting hurdle. There's going to be the public hurdle. It's not going to happen fast. And these facilities are being built now. They are intervening in Public Service Commission rate cases now to build new fossil fuel infrastructure now. So my perception of the situation is that Microsoft is putting out press releases about small modular reactors that they may buy electricity from in the future at some unspecified date, while they are currently underwriting the actual manufacture of new fossil fuel plants. We have to meet our emissions targets now. We cannot build new gas plants while Microsoft creates a PR bubble for itself by saying that they are going to power these with nuclear power that they can't actually buy yet. And that's totally outside of the discussion about whether or not nuclear power is a good or a bad thing. I will say that for the language that we have provided to be included in the sales and use tax exemptions, it does allow for nuclear power if that's the choice that the utility and the operator make. It does technically allow for it. It just says you can't pass that cost on to ratepayers. You don't get billions of tax dollars to build a nuclear plant to power your facility. I don't know if that was like a satisfactory answer, but that's the best one I can give.
Doug has one more.
Yeah, just a quick on another part of the installation is the what are we doing for the noise pollution? Are we forcing the?
I am so glad you mentioned that. I can't believe I forgot to say that. Marty, local noise ordinances. Thank you, Doug. That is like, I actually should probably put something in the presentation about that so I don't forget it. So in places where, and I don't know if they're using water to cool, they might not use fans the same way, but in facilities where there are these massive server farms, they often have fans that are running to cool everything as well. And those fans create a level of noise that is actually impacts human health in a pretty alarming way. And I know it doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but there is an entire book that I think was just published by a reporter that works for Time magazine about the health impacts in an entire town in Texas associated with the constant droning level of noise that's coming from the server farms that are there. And again, like I really encourage you to read some of this reporting. I haven't read the book yet, but I've read some of his reporting, and it's pretty alarming. It doesn't sound like it would be this like super nefarious, outcome of being near one of these facilities, but there are people with like headaches that are completely debilitating that started at some point, and like other weird mystery pain and ailments. And they're actually as they've been tracking it, the medical professionals are saying more and more, we think this is a result of the effects of being around this constant droning sound all the time. It's literally making people sick. So I think that that is definitely there. We have lots of precedents for noise zoning and noise restrictions. That's something that is very commonly decided at the local level. And so I think one of the things that local government can do is pass really strict noise ordinances associated with any of these facilities. And that should apply to, no one should have thousands of diesel generators running, obviously. But that level of, I don't know if you guys have heard one diesel generator running, they're quite loud. So I think that same kind of noise and air quality ordinance should apply to any diesel generators running too. Yes, the book or the author, it is Tim, I want to say Chang or Chun. He's with Time magazine. If you Google mystery Texas health problems, associated with like data center noise, it'll pop up. Chang. Oh, Jane said that too. Let me go find it. I can find it for you guys. Give me 1 second. Are there any other questions while I'm poking around? Let's see.
The Fatal Rhythm, a medical thriller and Christian mystery? Nope. That's what pops up. Attica Box, new mystery.
Order time. There he is. Okay, let's see. Andrew Chow, that's who he is. Okay. So here is the article that I think he actually turned into a book. If you guys want to read it. I really should do a slide on that. It's ridiculous that I keep forgetting to mention it.
Well, I'm gonna have to go take a nap after this.
It's just some fun facts that speaking of local government, one more closing thing I want to mention. I'm going to call it disinformation and not misinformation. Like misinformation is like the nice version. I'm going to call it disinformation. The disinformation that's been flowing around about data centers has involved intentionally working to recruit local elected officials to sign on to letters in support of tax breaks for these facilities. And local electeds really do not have the information that they need in order to make that decision. They are not, first of all, they're not being given a rundown of how Switch came for more money and screwed local schools. They have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to the energy, water, and ratepayer impacts. And they are just completely do not understand how this is going to keep us from meeting our climate goals. And that's okay, because not everybody is a policy wonk who's tracking these things. What is not okay is that they've been fed disinformation by very powerful lobbyists and people working with them. And they are being asked to take public positions as elected officials in support of things that are actually potentially very very bad for communities. And very specifically, the mayor of Ferndale and the mayor of Pleasant Ridge signed on to a letter in support of tax breaks for data centers without any guardrails. And they did that without being given the full picture. So if you have the opportunity to check in with your local elected official, if nothing else, just say like, hey, I want to talk to you about this. This is coming up again. I know it sounds obscure. It's not. It's talking about artificial intelligence and how we actually build it out. We got to talk about this. I highly encourage you to do that. And I'm happy to support that and join and provide facts or whatever. But it's important to take that one on because there are a lot of mayors that were actually snowed, which sucks.
Okay, any other questions for Christy or comments before we sign off? I see there's another message. Beyond going off grid, is there even an option of opting out of AI from the user end?
There's no transparency, Lily. My guess would be at this point, we're not even totally aware of when we're interacting with AI. So I don't see an individual choice way of opting out because of the lack of transparency issues.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to save the chat.
Jeff has his hand. Jeff,
Yeah,
did you?
Jeff, go ahead.
I don't know exactly what kind of question this is, Christy, because neither of us has a crystal ball. But I'm just thinking, thinking historically, I think chances are pretty good that we're looking at it. The AI is going to be another .com bust. We're all going to be super excited. It's going to, there's going to be a boom of data centers and some venture capitalists are going to make a few quick bucks but like it's not going to continue to grow in the ways that the boosters who are always boosting the latest tech gadget are imagining for us. And I'm just, I'm wondering like what I don't know, safeguards are, are we going to wind up with a bunch of like massive data centers that get abandoned? Is that in any way a part of the conversation?
Yes, it is. That is a fantastic question. That is exactly why the AEP intervention happening in Ohio is so interesting. Because the Public Service Commission in Ohio, again, like deep red state, that is like a lot of good things are not happening in Ohio. I think like one of their Public Service Commission members actually like went to prison for fraud or something. It's like bad news in Ohio. But the Public Service Commission there is questioning what tech companies are saying they're actually building because they think that ratepayers in Ohio are about to get stuck paying for stranded assets. So one of the, if you feel like getting really nerdy about it, in our Demanding Better report, we outline how people can both informally and formally intervene in Public Service Commission proceedings in order to make sure that we are not underwriting things that are going to become stranded assets. And that's a huge concern for folks all over the country.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Christy. It's been fabulous. I hope we can take the recording and share it with other people who couldn't come today because obviously everybody needs to know about this.
Yes, please do. And if anyone wants some ideas on how either like entities within Oakland University can organize around this or like Oakland University as itself can organize, I'd be happy to throw those out there. Any entity can intervene in Public Service Commission proceedings. For example, they are a purchaser of lots of things. There's a lot of power through big institutional purchasing. So happy to brainstorm later.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Hear from you after the election.
Thank you.